So Donald Trump is now the president of the United States, which means he has a lot of things to focus on from his agenda, from mass deportations to imposing tariffs to even maybe taking Greenland. It's a long list of goals and items on his list that he needs to get done. But to get any of it through, he's going to need a large team of people to help him get his things achieved. But as we've covered here on the Ishaan S show previously, some of the people Trump has been picking are, let's say, unique. People with all sorts of interesting backgrounds, from Fox News hosts to people that have shot their own dogs. And so we here at the Ishaan S show are going to do some of the heavy lifting for you and introduce you to the men and women who are going to make decisions about your life every single day. We'll talk about notable moments from their careers, their backgrounds, and stuff any ordinary person probably wouldn't want their boss to know about. This is an Ishaan S show mini-series, Meet the Trump Administration. So do you remember that funding freeze that we had a few weeks ago when basically the entire federal government was put on pause? All the payments that they make, from Social Security to Head Start to food stamps, they were all put in doubt. Do you remember that? Do you remember how the federal government has been on this crusade to fire federal workers for no reason other than to fulfill this random campaign promise that they were going to cut inefficiencies? But then they did stupid things like firing the entire nuclear arsenal. That type of thinking doesn't come just willy-nilly out of nowhere. It takes strategic planning, it takes strategic thinking. And today we're talking about a man who's been instrumental in making that happen. It's not Donald Trump, it's not Elon Musk, it's this guy, Russell Vought. You may not have heard of Russell Vought, and you may have never heard of his designation, Office of Management and Budget Director. You've probably never come across that designation before. And that's because it's not traditionally the type of role that gets a lot of attention. Not until right now, anyway. Their job is basically to implement the president's policies. Like when the president is responsible for carrying out the laws Congress passes, the director of the Office of Management and Budget, they're responsible for pushing through all of the money and all of the payments and all of that sort of transactional stuff that the president would like to do, the way the president would like to implement a bill. They manage regulations, they ensure that federal agencies are complying with the regulations and the expectations of the president. Like basically their job is to make sure that the federal government is running in check. And it's a very powerful role. And it is a role that holds a lot of influence in the way policy is carried out in this country. It's just one of those jobs that you'll never hear about because traditionally a director of the Office of Management and Budget is just supposed to shut up and do their job. They're supposed to just sit on the sidelines and let the president do his thing. But uniquely, Russell Vought, the guy that now holds this job, is someone who has a lot more influence than traditionally thought. He is a fiscal conservative who loves deep spending cuts. He's a Trump loyalist who's expanded his power, and his own power as well as Trump's power, an advocate for expanding Trump's power as president. He is someone who's previously held this role and was the deputy director of this same agency in the first Trump administration, and most notably, in my opinion, he was a key architect of Project 2025, the Heritage Foundation's blueprint for a second Trump administration. You might have heard of Project 2025. Well, Russell Vought was a key architect of this whole program. And actually that leads us into story number 1 about Russell Vought. And that was his role in Project 2025. And as I said, it's a right-wing blueprint that basically outlines very good in detail what the Heritage Foundation, this conservative think tank, wanted a new Republican administration to do. Throughout the campaign, Donald Trump and his campaign kept rejecting this idea. He kept separating himself from from Project 2025. They're like, what is Project 2025? I have no idea what you're talking about. But Throughout much of this administration in the last 4 weeks, they have pushed a lot of Project 2025's agenda, and they have hired one of its key architects to be in the top levels of decision-making in Russell Vought. Some of the goals of Project 2025 include dismantling the federal bureaucracy and expanding presidential power, replacing career civil servants with political appointees. We're starting to see that. Slashing regulations on businesses, particularly environmental and labor ones. Cracking down on progressive policies related to race, gender, and immigration. We're also seeing that as well. It is right out of the Project 2025 playbook. As much as they said that they were not going to do anything, had nothing to do with Project 2025, as much as they said that they would not at all pay attention to it, it is exactly what this administration is doing. And its key architect, Russell Vought, you should know, was instrumental in making it happen. Some of the things that Russell Vought personally contributed to Project 2025 include the budgetary strategy for a second Trump administration, the budgetary strategy of how money in the federal government under a Trump administration needs to be spent, where money needs to go, how funds should be allocated, all of that. That funding freeze, he was an instrumental figure in that funding freeze. Then it's advocated for the mass firings of government employees via Schedule F. We'll talk about that in a little bit in the episode, but he was a big proponent of this whole fire the bureaucracy, fire the deep state type of thing. He's a champion of that. He also called for defunding programs like diversity initiatives, DEI, and climate action. That's something we've also seen in this new Trump administration, rolling back of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, because for some reason, this administration is very against the notions of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm sure in a later episode, we'll talk about some of the ways they've messed up even trying to implement that. But you should know that Russell Vought, instrumental in crafting this whole idea that we should be cutting back the federal government's involvement in just about everything, including the ways that it benefits all of us and keeps us safe. But that's story number one about Russell Vought. Story number two has to do from his time as Deputy Director of the Office of Management and Budget, back when he was being confirmed to this role in 2017. He basically got in a little bit of trouble for a statement he made. I don't know if you want to say trouble. It depends on how you feel about what he said. But I'll say that it was troublesome. But basically, his alma mater of Wheaton College, they terminated the employment of a professor who said that people of different faiths, particularly Muslims and Christians, worship the same God. It's a notion that has been supported by a lot of religious scholars, including other religious people like the Pope. It's a pretty common form of thinking, but Wheaton College felt this thing that they're like, no way we can allow something like this type of thought. So they let go this professor. And so Russell Vought, who is Wheaton College alum, wrote an article basically explaining why Wheaton College should be in its full right to make decisions about its employment. And you know what? As a college, I think they can do what they want. They are a Christian college. They can hire who they want. They can fire who they want. But the reasoning that Mr. Vought provided in his whole reasoning for letting go this professor, he was so outraged by the thought of religious pluralism. He literally wrote, and I'm quoting now, so listen up, quote, "Muslims do not simply have a deficient theology. They do not know God because they have rejected Jesus Christ, his son, and they stand condemned." Quite the statement to make. He essentially called an entire religion of people to be condemned. Like, it is quite the statement, a blanket statement, mind you, quite the blanket statement to make about an entire group of people. But I mean, the way he's worded his statement, I don't think it extends to just Muslims. It's a much larger window of people that Russell Vought attacked in that statement. But yeah, he was so outraged by the thought of this professor saying that people worship the same God that he felt the need to say that an entire religion of people stand condemned. This became a really hot topic in his confirmation hearings for Deputy Director of the Office of Management and Budget, including Senator Bernie Sanders, who questioned and grilled him on his views about this whole ordeal. I'm going to play some of that exchange for you. Take a look.
You wrote, quote, Muslims do not simply have a deficient theology. They do not know God because they have rejected Jesus Christ, his son, and they stand condemned. End of quote. Do you believe that that statement is Islamophobic?
Absolutely not, Senator. I'm a Christian, and I believe in a Christian set of principles based on my faith. That post, as I stated in the questionnaire to this committee, was to defend my alma mater, Wheaton College, a Christian school that has a statement of faith that includes the centrality of Jesus Christ for salvation. And
again, I apologize. Forgive me. We just don't have a lot of time. Do you believe that people in the Muslim religion stand condemned? Is that your view?
Again, Senator, I'm a Christian, and I wrote that piece.
Well, what does that say?
With the statement of faith of Wheaton
I understand that. I don't know how many Muslims there are in America. I really don't know. Probably a couple of million. Are you suggesting that all of those people stand condemned? What about Jews? They stand condemned too?
Senator, I'm a Christian.
I understand you are a Christian, but this country is made up of people who are not just. I understand that Christianity is the majority religion, but there are other people who have different religions in this country and around.
So Senator Sanders' whole point was that because Vought thinks that entire religion of people is inferior, or that he thinks that they stand to be condemned, that he can't serve all people fairly. And I mean, maybe that is not the worst thing to suggest. Like, it's not the most outlandish thing that he's suggesting based on what we have read Russell Vought say. Russell Vought, for his part, he stood by his comments. He said they were reflected in his personal faith and not his ability to serve in government. Religious conservatives defended Vought as well. They accused Sanders of putting a religious test on Vought in his confirmation, suggesting that questioning the deputy director of OMB's views on an entire religion of people is a religious test now. Critics of Vought argued that they were casting doubt in Vought's ability to serve all Americans. And you know what? If you're gonna question the ability, or rather, not even the ability, but the standing that entire groups of people have, I think it is problematic and it is worth questioning. Especially when you say, again, and I can't stop repeating the same quote, when you say that an entire religion of people, quote, stand condemned, you have to be able to answer for that. That is not a personal faith thing. And if it is a personal faith thing, keep it to yourself. Keep it to yourself. Maybe that would help. But that's story number 2 about Russell Vought. Story number 3 takes us to 2019. So this is after he got confirmed. He did get confirmed. But it was actually so close that Vice President Mike Pence had to come in at the time. But it was this story number 3 has to do with Ukraine, Trump, $400 million of military aid. You might know what I'm talking about. So back in 2019, Donald Trump there was this whole call that surfaced of Donald Trump talking to President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine, suggesting that $400 of military aid from the United States to Ukraine would be withheld unless Volodymyr Zelensky could find dirt on Joe Biden, who at the time was going to be Donald Trump's opponent, most likely opponent in the 2020 election. I mean, as problematic, I mean, in a sense, just how deeply problematic threatening the leader of another country this way, let alone a country like Ukraine, which we all know what happened there. It's a whole other thing that he literally was blackmailing for dirt on a political rival. Anyway, that resulted in Donald Trump's impeachment, first impeachment, because there were multiple, but it resulted in his first impeachment. And so in the middle of that investigation, Office of Management and Budget got caught in the hot water, because obviously $400 million of military aid being withheld goes directly through OMB. They manage that type of money. And so Vought was subpoenaed by Congress, by the House of Representatives, in their investigation into Donald Trump, in their impeachment inquiry. They were investigating Trump. They subpoenaed Vought among other OMB officials, but Vought decided that he was going to resist the subpoena because it's a sham and he for no way could ever participate in something against Donald Trump. On Twitter, he said, quote, "I saw some fake news over the weekend to correct, period, as the White House letter made clear 2 weeks ago, OMB officials, myself and Mike Duffy," another official, "will not be complying with deposition requests this week. Hashtag sham process." So he just decided that he wasn't going to comply with a subpoena because he thought a subpoena, which is basically a mandate from Congress to come and testify, like come here right now and tell us what you know. Instead of complying with that, he instead decided that he was going to tweet that this is a sham process to defend Donald Trump. I mean, it's important again to recognize, and I think OMB, personally, this is where I first heard about the Office of Management and Budget, not because of Russell Vought, but just because of the role that they played in a situation like this. They were directly involved in withholding that aid. Again, Ukraine, which we've been talking about for 3 years now, almost 3 years. 3 years before that, there was this whole talk of withholding their aid for dirt on Joe Biden. Like this is where OMB got involved. They were responsible for withholding the aid, despite Congress already approving it. And again, we're starting to see remnants of that again right now, of withholding of aid despite Congress approving it. And emails revealed that OMB officials under Vought told the Pentagon and State Department to freeze money. They were literally participating in this. So I don't know if it was Vought trying to clean his hands. I don't know if it was coming at defense of his boss, but whatever it is, he defied a congressional subpoena. And obviously Donald Trump was later impeached by the House of Representatives and then acquitted in the Senate just a few months later. But that's story number 3 about Russell Vought. Story number 4 is what I was just talking about earlier, which is Schedule F and the work purge. So back in 2020, Donald Trump, when he was president the first time, issued Executive Order 13957, which reclassified thousands of federal employees into this new category of Schedule F. And Schedule F, basically designed by Vought, in a sense, this policy stripped career civil servants of their job protections and making them easier to fire and replace. I mean, we're seeing it right now. Right now, we're seeing people getting at risk of getting laid off, the federal funding freeze, which has resulted in people getting fired anyway, the FBI stuff we're seeing, all of this, the whole federal government purge that we're seeing right now. This is not something that just started this year. This is something that was in the works years ago, including in Trump's first administration, when they designed an entire policy to strip career civil servants of job protections, making them easier to fire and replace. And Russell Vought, again, instrumental in constructing this entire policy that Donald Trump signed via executive order in 2020. And so this whole Schedule F reclassification program essentially allowed for a political purge of federal workers and of federal agencies. And it turned all these agencies into extensions of the White House rather than being natural institutions whose job it is to just carry out the law. No, now they are working directly under the White House. And Russell Vought, again, instrumental in constructing this whole program. And it was meant to silence career experts in areas like public health and climate science and law enforcement. They've been going at this for a really long time. And so it later came back when Project 2025, that whole right-wing blueprint was being constructed. They brought this whole Schedule F reclassification idea into Project 2025, and now we're seeing it in action in a much larger scale right now. And again, the one person you have to thank for all of this is Russell Vought, your current Office of Management and Budget Director. He basically is, again, has this whole agenda, this whole crusade against federal workers. And in his own words, he says he wants federal workers to be, quote, in trauma as a result of his policies. He wants federal workers to be in trauma. I don't know about federal workers, but I can tell you that when this administration and from that disastrous funding freeze just a few weeks ago that he was also responsible for, I think a lot of Americans, when they lost were questioning access to Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, food benefits, Head Start, among all these other programs. I think a lot of Americans were very traumatized by the actions of Mr. Vought and what he did in the Office of Management and Budget as acting director. He was actually, after that whole ordeal, he was confirmed as the director of OMB by the narrowest of margins, and Senate Democrats held up that nomination for as long as they could before he was ultimately brought in. But yeah, this is a lot of what he's done. And so those are some of the stories on Russell Vought. As you can tell, if you wanted to get a SparkNotes version of who this guy is, basically the anti-federal worker guy. That's who he is. And he has that one-stop agenda of completely restructuring the federal government to make it in Donald Trump's image so that it does Donald Trump's bidding. And it's been a pet project of his, something he's been very passionate about. So by virtue of just the type of role he's been playing in this White House, I know we're going to be covering him in our regular episodes as well, or maybe at least his work we will be covering. We're going to be talking about this whole federal government purge that we're seeing, and we'll talk about some of the effects that Mr. Vought's plans have had on the American people. I mean, we've already seen little elements of it, including people losing access to preschool education for their kids and losing access to food stamps in some cases. Like, it's very evident. We're starting to see the effects of it. So we'll keep track of it. But if you liked my commentary, then go ahead and follow the Ishaan S Show on Spotify, subscribe on YouTube, follow us on social media, check out the IshaanSShow.com for more things about the Ishaan S Show. Share this episode and all your other Meet the Trump Administration episodes, the ones that you like, with your friends and family. Thank you so much for all of your support. I'll see you in the next one.